People on the political left tend to regard empathy and compassion as fundamental political values. Empathy and compassion are central to the political views of many left-wing people. There are exceptions to this, but by and large, the political left assigns a lot of value to empathy and compassion. This means that left-wing claims and left-wing arguments often rely on appeals to empathy and compassion. This approach has serious shortcomings when trying to convince those on the political right. This approach is often an ineffective means of appealing to right-wing people. Of course, some right-wingers are empathetic and compassionate, but the political right does not value these things to anywhere near the same extent as the left does. Many on the right have little to no interest in empathy. Appeals to empathy are sometimes futile. Many on the right are averse to empathy, so don't bother trying to appeal to it. The right doesn't care, that is why it is often more productive to point out stupidity. Many people think that being evil makes them a cold-hardened realist, but nobody wants to be regarded as a mindless fool. Emphasize empathy less and rationality more. Emphasize compassion less and pragmatism more. Emphasize injustice less and stupidity more. This is what we must do. Many of those on the right do not care if you regard them as lacking in empathy. Many on the right do not care if you think they are cruel. They will smugly sit back and regard themselves as hard realists who understand the true nature of the world. Many people do not care if their views are regarded as evil. They will simply view themselves as hardened, emotionless realists. But nobody wants to be regarded as irrational, illogical, naive, or foolish. So these things must be emphasized. We must emphasize the illogical and stupid nature of much right-wing policy. No use talking about how it is oppressive or unjust, cruel or prejudiced. They know it is all of those things, and often they do not care. But they will care if their positions come to be associated with stupidity. Being associated with racism and bigotry does not bother them, but being associated with idiocy certainly will. We must emphasize things that are universally considered bad, not simply things that are only bad according to our own political values. Because if we rely on our own political values, we will struggle to appeal to those who lack those values. This is not to say we should not value empathy. This is not to say that we should never appeal to empathy. I am simply saying that we should use a range of strategies to convince people of our views. Sometimes empathy works, but sometimes it doesn't. We have to be ready for the fact that sometimes it doesn't. We have to accept that our values are not universal, they are not held in high regard by everyone. So rhetoric must be adjusted to appeal to the values of our opponents. Attack them according to their own values. Reveal their failure to honour their own values. Don't criticize them by making appeals to values that they don't even hold. Attack them with their own values. If they don't value anti-racism or compassion, don't appeal to these things. Appeal to the values that they do possess, and you will have a better chance of shaking their loyalty to their positions. Sometimes we may want to criticize someone to appeal to our own supporters or recruit more neutral observers. But converting our political opponents is important, and that means appealing to their values to the extent that we can while maintaining our own. The right does not assign much value to empathy and compassion. Often using these things to win them over is a waste of time. Of course, this is not true of all right-wingers, but it is true of many. Focus on reason and stupidity. Focus on the values that the right holds. Order, security, pragmatism, reason, freedom. These are good values. Values that right-wing policymakers often betray. so point out that betrayal. Accept their values and attack them for failing to follow them. Criticize the fiscal conservative for borrowing to fund tax cuts. Criticize the advocate of bodily autonomy for opposing abortion. Criticize the freedom-loving conservative who wants cannabis to remain criminalized. Criticize them for failing to take their own values seriously. Of course, there is a conversation to be had about rational empathy. Empathy does not have to be purely emotional and non-rational. Empathy can be given a rational justification. The propagation of empathy and compassion is in the interest of a being that can suffer. Undermining empathy and compassion is not in the interest of a being who can suffer. A society that is opposed to suffering is in the interest of one who can suffer. These are philosophical maxims that connect empathy and compassion to basic necessities of self-interest. In doing so, they provide empathy with a highly rational justification. This is a philosophical argument. It will be appropriate in some discussions and debates, but wildly out of place in others. Still, it is worth remembering that empathy and compassion does have a rational basis and is not just an emotional force. But anyway, I must bring my ramblings to an end. My core point is simple. If we want to effectively win them over, we must not appeal to the values that they do not possess. We must convince them that our values are correct, or we must make an appeal to their own values.